Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of The Guys Who Stare at Stats. Cade Kennedy here alongside my good friend Tyler Riggs. And usually when Tyler shows up, either something has gone absolutely chaotic in the world of college sports or it's time to preview some college football. And we had the realignment 2 days ago, Tyler. You know, if you would have just been here a little bit earlier, we could have got there. But so close. But, folks, starting with our Big 12 preview here, as you can clearly see on the screen with the Texas schedule currently up. We're not going to do like we did last year. If you remember, that was a long 4-hour stream we did. This time we're going to break it up a bit more into parts here, starting, of course, with the Big 12. We'll release the SEC, Big 10, Pac-12, ACC, all those coming out over the next week or so. So you're going to want to stick around, leave a like, subscribe to the channel, leave a comment down below, because with us two getting together, you're probably going to agree with one of us or disagree. There's going to be some fun, in the comments there. I'm sure everyone's got their own opinion. It's what makes this so great.
Maybe so. And, of course, we'll have our disagreements, I'm sure, back and forth. So the more voices that, the better.
Absolutely. And, I mean, let's just get right into it. Texas, obviously, first time since 2009 the Longhorns have been favorites to win the Big 12, which is something that to some people it was a bit surprising. To some people it was, okay, we've had this running joke of Texas is back for how long now, and we're finally here. It's year 3 for Steve Sarkisian. Texas went 8-5 last year, and obviously, Tyler, you look at the schedule, there's one elephant in the room, the literal elephant of the Alabama Crimson Tide, just sitting there September 9th. You look at Big 12 opener at Baylor. You get Kansas at home, of course, the Red River rivalry to start October. You get Houston, which is a fun game if you know the history between those two. BYU, there's history there between the Cougars and the Longhorns. And then you look at November, Kansas State, TCU, at Iowa State, and Texas Tech. I mean, a tough stretch in November there for Texas.
Yeah, definitely a draw that overall makes for, if Texas, gets through most of it unscathed, they're legit, right? I mean, it's definitely not a weak schedule, I would say.
No, and I mean, for Texas here, this is one of those that the opportunity presents itself at the very worst. I mean, even the worst of Texas here, I would expect to be 4-1 going into Dallas here. You look at that early part. Baylor and Kansas, I expect to give them a game. Rice and Wyoming, you don't expect that at all. But this is a Texas team to me this year that I think this is one of those odd years for them. And I mean, you could say that about the last decade we've had of Texas football, but this year more than most, in that you look at, the Tom Herman era, the end of Mack Brown, Charlie Strong, that entire regime, they never had this target on their back of you are picked to be the favorite. There was always that expectation among the fan base that you had to win it. But now everyone is converged on. This is the official year, you feel like, especially your last year in the Big 12. Texas needs to win this thing, because if they don't, you finally have all this pressure on you. You go to the SEC. What does that say about you? You couldn't get the job done now that you need to get it done.
Right. And, it harkens back to, at least for Texas, a mindset of, hey, we are that team, right? And like you said, they've got to be matching that sort of hype and energy. And we've seen in previous experiences with OU, that can be a little tough sometimes to match those preseason expectations. So it'll be really interesting. And on paper, Cade, I'm sure we'll talk about this more, but on paper, they've got everything, right? They've got the quarterback situation, so they're bringing back top talent at the receiver position. Most of their defense is coming back. Really, the only big question mark I would say is probably the running back spot. You did lose, obviously, Bijan, and you lost Roschon Johnson. Those two were pretty good as a 1-2 combo. But when you got everything else, the run game is something you can kind of fill in as you go. And it's Texas. They've recruited well enough that theoretically, okay, it's next man up for those spots that they may be a little question marked at, if you will. So on paper, this is a team that, they should get it done on paper.
And I mean, to your point, you mentioned a few things there. You look at the keys for Texas this year. The defense, to me, is the biggest thing, because how many times have we seen a Texas team, they could score on people, but they get scored on? That wasn't really the case for Texas last year. They had the second best defense in the Big 12, whether that be scoring defense or total defense. For me, for Texas, if they really win the Big 12 this year, their main key to me that defense has to be consistent, because if you do that, Quinn Ewers can have a few bad moments here and there. You can have a little bit of struggles. If that defense can keep going and keep building, I mean, you have Byron Murphy on the defensive line, you have Jalen Ford at linebacker, you have the keys, like you said. On paper, this is a talented Texas team, but how many times have we heard that since 2010? This is the Texas team on paper, but looking at their schedule, I mean, you look at it, at least from my perspective, this is a Texas team that could go 11-1. This is a Texas team that could win 8 games again. Now, we've got Steve Sarkisian. He has that kind of moniker. He hasn't had a 10-win season yet. I don't know if Texas can be the team this year, Tyler. I mean, now, obviously, I'm an OU fan, so biases even aside, I don't know if they can do it, because you look at that stretch, I could see them beating Oklahoma. That's not a game, that's you throw everything out the window. I could see them going to Alabama and giving Alabama a close game. We know how Texas plays in those type of environments. But that Kansas State, at TCU, at Iowa State, Texas Tech, I could easily see them going 2-2 in that month of November, and that just derailing everything.
Well, and, you bring up those points. I think that's kind of the right mindset of it. We're going to figure out where this Texas team is at, and maybe more so where Alabama is at early in the season with that Week 2 matchup. But even if they drop that one, like you said, they should be 4-1 going into that showdown with Oklahoma. And they should be the favorites in that, barring Oklahoma just coming out and looking fantastic. OU and we'll get to that with OU. OU has a pretty easy schedule pre-Texas. They should look like they've at least hopefully improved, I think, for a lot of the Sooner fans out there. And if they get past that matchup, you kind of get some reprieve a little bit. I mean, Houston, the environment might be a little tough, but we'll get to Houston later. I don't know if you can expect much out of them as a team this year. BYU, we know, is going to be rebuilding. But you're right, it's really that November stretch. You start with the Kansas State game and go on through those 4. Those will be interesting games. And I think that last one there especially, let's say you beat Kansas State, you beat TCU, you beat Iowa State. I think Texas Tech is going to make some noise this year. I kind of feel them as a dark horse. We'll get to that with them. But, those are not easy games. And, if you're Texas and let's say you somehow beat Bama, you roll OU, you roll into that Kansas State game undefeated. Does Texas's pride and ego start to get in the way? Quinn Ewers maybe get some Heisman hype or somebody like that, and that's where you get tripped up. So it'll be interesting to see how, especially Steve Sarkisian, navigates that with what are probably, you would argue, maybe the biggest expectations of him as a head coach in his career for a season. I mean, we're at that point with him.
Yeah, we are, and I mean, I agree with you there. I think I don't want to say the worst thing for Texas is going undefeated, but if you think about it, with how they've been the last few years especially, I'm more worried if they beat Alabama.
Oh, yeah.
If you beat Alabama, obviously
to the moon, man.
It's to the moon. Texas is a top 3 team. No one in the Big 12 is touching them. And while, Texas fans will be loving it, and I'm sure, the team will get their fair share of praise if they do beat Alabama. It would be deserved. But you don't think they have to think about that game in Waco and 2 weeks after? You don't think Dave Aranda's going to be sitting there scheming, knowing every single little thing to irritate Texas? And there's one thing that can be done about Texas. When they are very prideful at the moment, that is their biggest chance to be beat. It really is to me. I mean, that can go for any team, but especially what we've seen from Texas. You get a big win, and then that week after, you got to come back down to earth, and that usually, I mean, that's a key for an upset anywhere.
Yeah, no, it is. And, especially nowadays with teenagers, I mean, we're kind of post-teenage years, but we're still, I mean, you're finishing up your college this year, and I've been around it for quite a while because I've grown up with my life. Social media, man, it is a factor, especially with these younger guys. You can't just shut that out. You'll hear a lot of guys say, oh, yeah, we're not on social media. That's a lie. These guys are on social media, and they see the hype or the criticism, whatever it may be. And it can be tough to block that out nowadays. So, like we're talking about, it'll just be really interesting to see how the team either rebounds or tries to continue on, depending on how that Alabama game goes. I think early season, that could set a tone one way or another. I'm not saying it'd be good for them to lose the Alabama game, but it almost might be a little bit better in the long run, kind of wake them up. But, I mean, on paper, again, this team, I could see why people are picking them at the top of the Big 12.
And I could see why too. It's just, to me, I think if you swap schedules with Texas and Oklahoma, I would probably be right there saying, of course Texas is the favorite. They deserve to be the favorite. But there's something about that November, that Kansas State at TCU at Iowa State. Iowa State being sandwiched in between TCU and Texas Tech, by the way. I know Iowa State on the road in Ames. We know how that place can be, especially the last time you might ever play them.
Oh, yeah.
You don't think that's a crowd that won't be out for blood against them? Just, you know the history of Texas and Iowa State. You know it's been a bit rocky the past few times. You've had a controversial call here or there that might make some people upset. It's just something about that feels like that's just a death trap for them that they're going to walk into. Even if they are, one-loss team, I think Texas is probably going to finish as a 9-win team. And with how tight the Big 12, I think, will be this year, you already mentioned Texas Tech, Kansas State, of course. Number 2, we'll talk about them next, Oklahoma as well. Even TCU, who was in the national championship game last year, they're 5th. Obviously, they've lost some. We'll talk about them later. It's just something about that stretch just doesn't sit right with me, Tyler.
Yeah, but I don't know what it is. I usually don't get this feeling about Texas, obviously. But I just feel like if they handle that Kansas State game well, in terms of maybe Kansas State throws them some early punches, they respond well, they're able to take that game. I think the rest of the month of November goes well for them on through. And, Cade, I just feel like, if Texas is going to do it, it's going to be this year. Everything lines up too well for them. I'm kind of – I would say I'm drinking the Kool-Aid, but I'm close. I'm close on getting to where this team I could very easily see an 11-1 finish. And if they do that, you're talking college football playoff, and they might be a team to watch in that.
Yeah, they absolutely could, but I don't know. To me, it's one of those – Quinn Ewers still really hasn't proven himself to me, I guess. Yes, he has the highs.
I don't know about
but
that.
You
he
look
had
at
some
that.
Moments when he came
he
back.
had some
I
moments,
think he was all right.
But the one that always sticks with me is that Oklahoma State game where you see just meltdown after meltdown after meltdown. Not just from him, by himself. The whole Texas team just kind of got rattled for a collective moment there in Stillwater. But Xavier Worthy, he had issues with some drop passes. Obviously, there might have been an injury there, a little bit of an issue. We'll see if that gets corrected. I think Texas, like you said, Tyler, they have the potential to be that 11-win team, but right now, until I see it vindicated and proven, I'll believe it when I see it. To me, they're a 9-win team.
Well, and just kind of wrap up my points on that. What we saw last year, I think, was your growing pains, right? You got to remember, Ewers hadn't really had a chance to be out in the limelight like that. Xavier Worthy, as much hype as he's gotten over the first 2 seasons, has been really good and is going to play on Sundays in the future as a top-tier receiver. Those big moments, they went through them. Some of them they rattled, some of them they performed well. I think that was good growing pains. So, if it was a flip situation where we're talking the other side of that, I'd be excited about the fact that, hey, you went through some adversity last year. You may have, messed up here and there, but you've been through that now, so you can come in this year, and I don't think there's anything that will be thrown at Texas that they haven't seen before. That's kind of one of the big reasons to why I'm buying into the hype, because they are now experienced. They've all been through it, and I think the response there will be better. Now, that being said, it is definitely on a guy like Quinn Ewers and Xavier Worthy. Those guys have to come out in every single game. Doesn't matter if you're playing Iowa State, Baylor, playing Bama, or somebody like that. You've got to come out and set the tone. So we'll be watching early seasons to see how those guys react to any sort of adversity that comes their way.
Yeah, it is going to be a fun season possibly. With Texas, you never know. I think that's the main takeaway, at least for me. We're still a wait and see, at least in my opinion. But that will wrap Texas up. And, one team down, 14 minutes later, Tyler, we are going through this thing. I'm not going to say a snail's pace yet, but we're slowly getting there. We got, 1 down, 13 more to go. Kansas State, the next team up, the defending Big 12 champions. You wouldn't think the team that went to the national championship game would have finished second, but it was the other purple team, Kansas State. Right. This is an experienced K-State team. Obviously, Chris Kleiman, you have a guy that knows how to win. He is, blood from a stone. He is that kind of coach that he can find any way to win. He's just such a fun guy to see, just being able to carry on the tradition that Bill Snyder started there at Kansas State. And, you see almost just the exact same, just everything almost. That same kind of style, that grittiness, that toughness, just that classic, Adrian Martinez last year. It almost looked like Colin Klein at times. Then that might have been I was at the K-State OU game and, You give up 41 points. I felt like I was having flashbacks in bed
Yeah.
with 4 rushing touchdowns. But what he's been able to do has just been impressive. And now Adrian Martinez gone. Deuce Vaughn, I think, kind of became one of the favorite players, not just of the Big 12, but America. Who doesn't love a 5'6" running back running over everybody?
Right? Yeah.
But I mean, 10-4 last year. You went to the Sugar Bowl if you're K-State. Number 2 right now, Kansas State. They have a great chance to go back to Arlington and compete and possibly win another Big 12 title, Tyler.
Well, and, I want to start off with Chris Klieman. You talk about how he's been able to essentially carry on the Bill Snyder culture that really built what K-State was at its peak. And, you mentioned how Adrian Martinez was looking like Colin Klein there for a bit. Well, one thing that Chris Klieman's really done well is acclimate himself with the culture of Kansas State in the history. So what has he done? He's went and got guys that had been part of that. So Colin Klein, offensive coordinator. You do moves like that. You make the statement that, hey, I want to keep what was best of the tradition, right, of Kansas State. And the players buy into that because those guys know that they're not high-tier recruits. Kansas State pretty much, and even more so now in the world of NIL, they don't go chase those 5-star guys. They know they cannot get them, but they go find the guys that they feel like could fit their program and, really develop those guys. They do probably the best job of anybody in the country in doing that. I mean, that is something that they pride themselves on, rightfully so. So it's a team that, from the jump is bought in, right? And that's a tough team to beat sometimes. I mean, when they're all rowing in the same ocean, to borrow PJ Fleck reference, when, you got everybody pulling the same way, it makes for a really united team. Doesn't always mean it's going to be high-tier success, but it makes things easier.
It does. And, I mean, you look at some of the key players here for Kansas State, you see that. Cooper Beebe hasn't allowed a sack in 2 years. I mean, that's just one of those. He
could have went pro, but came back because he loves playing for Kansas State.
Exactly. And, I mean, Kobe Savage, defensive back, absolutely fun. We already talked about Will Howard a little bit. He had to be the starter at times last year when Martinez got injured. And, I mean, this is a Kansas State team that, yes, they lose a good amount of playmakers, but they bring a decent amount of people back as well. And this is a team that, Tyler, if you had to tell me right now, if you asked me, pick the team that is going to win the Big 12, I would probably pick Kansas State. I mean, they have that experience. You look at their schedule. I mean, obviously, you get through your non-con. The only tough one there is Missouri. I think that's...
Is it, though? I think Troy might
tough,
have a better fight. Anyways, no.
Tough one in quotation. We'll get to Missouri when we do the SEC preview. UCF, obviously, that's going to be a big game there, welcoming them into the Big 12. You have the bye week. A little bit weird. Oklahoma State on a Friday night, just, really only a day's difference there. At Texas Tech, I'm going to tell you right now, that's a game you're going to want to watch. Kansas State at Texas Tech should be fun. Then TCU, Houston, at Texas, Baylor, Kansas, Iowa State. To me, for Kansas State, really the point is if you can just have maybe one conference loss by the end of that Texas game, you're golden. Because, I mean, Baylor's at home, at Kansas, Iowa State's at home. The schedule gets a lot easier at the end there, I would say. Not to say Kansas or Iowa State are pushovers. Kansas we'll get to in a little bit. I have my opinions on them and how they can be an intriguing team this year as well. But this is a Kansas State team that I think everything kind of goes their way again. Will Howard, I like him. I think he's grown a bit. I mean, you've talked about that with Texas, obviously. You thought Quinn Ewers grew a bit. I think this is Will Howard. He's going to be having a big step-up year. He's had that year of you already battled it out against TCU once. You have that experience of playing one of the best teams last year. This is going to be a good K-State team. They're still going to be able to, I think, adapt pretty well. I think that's something we've talked about with Coach Kleiman, what he does well. And I really do like this K-State team, Tyler.
No, and like you said a minute ago, as much as I'm buying into what Texas is offering, I would not be shocked at all if Kansas State winds up leading the Big 12 standings by the time we get to the Big 12 Conference Championship game, right? And the schedule shapes up for really well. That first big test is going to be at Texas Tech, like we talked about. I think that's kind of going to really tell us where both of those teams are at, especially Kansas State. And then after that, it's really getting up for Texas. And if you can do those things work out for you well, and this is going to be a really consistent team. And the only thing that is, in my mind, the separation is just there's so much talent on Texas, right? I know that's been the way in the past, and it hasn't come to fruition, but everything, like I mentioned, just kind of lines up for them. But Kansas State will absolutely be in a position to be waiting the wings, so to speak, if Texas slips And I think these two teams are 1A, 1B, and then it's everybody else trying to figure it out after that when you talk about the Big 12.
And speaking of, we've talked about 1A, 1B, right behind them, Oklahoma, picked to be third in the conference in the preseason poll here. Now, obviously, Brent Venables not having the best first year by any means imaginable. You go 6-7. That
it was
is
a disappointment, yeah.
It was, not just a disappointment, a massive disappointment compared to what Oklahoma usually is. But this is an Oklahoma team that obviously you'll have Dylan Gabriel back, and you look at it offensively, that's just about it. When you look at your main skill players as well, you lose Eric Gray, Marvin Mims is gone. This is going to be an interesting Oklahoma offense to see how well they regroup, because there's no big wide receiver you look at that is not really nationally known. I mean, obviously we're both Oklahoma fans. We know, Jaleel Farouk and Drake Stoops and things like that, but this is kind of weird. There's no big guy you look at Oklahoma this year and go, that's him. That's the guy that's going to make everyone go, I don't want to face that guy.
Sure. Yeah, there's no big, huge X factor.
Yeah.
Right? I think the thing that they do well, if we're just talking offensively for a moment, is, and we saw it in the bowl game, they need to lean on that run game. Javante Barnes, Gavin Sawchuk, I think those two guys are legit, and they both offer unique things within the offense. If I'm Jeff Lebby, I'm getting those guys a share. I mean, between the two of them, I'm trying to hit that 30 to 35 carry mark per game. And that's not to say you don't need to trust in Dylan Gabriel. You should, because he's a super senior. He needs to be able to shoulder that load and prove it. But make things easier on him, right? If you could use that run game and open some things up in the pass game, like we said, there's no big X-factor receiver. I think Drake Stoops is a really good leader, and he can make some splash plays. But there's no guy, like you said, that is going to – any other team's going to look at and say, wow, we have got to shut down this guy. Right, so lean on that run game, free some things up, and let the pass game kind of flow a little bit. I think that's the big key for OU, and that means not only production out of those two backs I mentioned, but that offensive line's got to be better. There was times last year where it just looked like things weren't as figured out as maybe they thought it would be.
And we mentioned it already, Tyler. You look at Oklahoma's schedule, and obviously it's supposed to be tougher. You had that Georgia game there originally, gets replaced by SMU. But you look at it, and there's really no big challenge for Oklahoma. Their big game is Texas, obviously, but, being an OU fan, it's one of those, if we're not 5-0 going into that game,
you'd be a little concerned, wouldn't you?
I would be, Cincinnati's kind of the one I look at of, if we show any signs of struggling in that game, first quarter, okay, whatever, Nippert Stadium for the first time.
Sure.
But if it's third quarter, late third quarter, and it's a one possession, you start to look at, okay, what are we doing here? Now, it starts to get a little bit worrying a bit.
I will contend that point. My issue will be if you don't win that game. Now, if you battle late and you're able to pull it out, I would take that as a fine sign, because this team, Cade, was 0-5 in one possession games last year.
Yes.
They were 0-5.
That is true, but I'd rather just avoid the whole one-possession game altogether.
I agree, and I understand, but I would look at it as a win in the sense of feeling okay about it. If you get in a battle, like I said, hey, it's the first time in Cincinnati, for conference play, Cincinnati's going to get up for that.
Yeah.
They're going to really get up for that. So, first of all, can you match that intensity? If you can, that's a good sign. Then can you make sure you do all the things down the stretch of a game where it might actually be a little closer and people think, can you pull it out? If they do that, I'd take that as a good early sign. As long as they come out there with a win, I'm okay with that. Now, if you trip up there, and it looks a lot like last year where maybe you have an early advantage, you let it slip, then that's when I'd start to get worried. Not so much for Iowa State, obviously, but like I said, for Texas, I mean, I'm not expecting OU to win that game per se, but it would be nice to at least be competitive in that one this year.
Yeah, it'll be – if OU can just score a point, it'll be better than last year. I mean, any points at all will be better than what happened last year with the 49-0 loss there. But you look at the rest of the schedule, you look at the back half after Texas, you get UCF, which will obviously have the fun storyline of Dylan Gabriel against his old team. A lot of UCF fans, I know they're excited for that game. A lot of, they want to make a trip to Norman. They want to see that. They want to see the Palace, and it'll be fun to see. Homecoming, obviously, Norman for that one as well. Then you go to Kansas. That's a game that I'm a bit excited for, because at Kansas for the last time, we know what happened the last time OU went to Kansas. It was a trip for a half, and then things got better. But I think Kansas will be ready for their A game. They already made that their homecoming, which, depending on which logic you follow for homecoming, some people thought it was a funny joke because it's supposed to be your worst opponent. Some people are just like, who cares? It's just, a big celebration.
Right.
So some people had some fun with that. I saw that floating around social media. But you look after that, that Kansas game worries me a little bit just because of what's right after that. The final Bedlam in Stillwater, which will be a giant game for OSU, probably, the biggest game of the year for them. That game's going to be nuts. I'm excited that I get to hopefully try to get to go to that thing because I want to see how nuts that place gets, but that's going to be a crazy one, Tyler. You come back, West Virginia at BYU, and then TCU on Black Friday.
Yeah, 11 a.m., right?
Yeah, good old 11 a.m.
On Black Friday, not Saturday, Black Friday. So for me, Cade, I think the OU schedule boils down to these 3 games, and they're all right there in the row. The Texas game, the UCF game, and the Kansas game. I think at Kansas, whether you consider the Red River game at home or whatever, I just consider that neutral. But that is actually, to me, probably the toughest road game on their schedule. And then UCF, I think, out of the new schools to the conference this year, is probably the most prepped to try to make a decent run at saying, hey, we're here and we're adjusted, right? They've got the most returning. They to me, look as the best of the 4 new schools. And so that 3-game stretch, I think, really decides a lot of Oklahoma's season. I'm not worried about Bedlam because I think OSU, and we'll get to it, lost too much for me to worry about Bedlam in that sense. But I think that 3-game stretch right there, Texas, UCF, and Kansas, that's where the meat of the season will be made for OU. Either make it or break it. Either you're coming out of that, if you come out of that 2-1 and you had won obviously before Texas, I think you're sitting pretty good going into the back half of that schedule into later stages. But I get a little worried if, you lose to Texas again in an embarrassing fashion. UCF will come in. They'll be ready to play in the Palace because that's a big get-up game for them. And then at Kansas could be treacherous if Kansas is healthy and they're at that point rolling a little bit in the season. So that could, trip you up. Then that's when you start getting concerned about Bedlam if you don't find any momentum after those 3 games.
Yeah, we will have to see with Oklahoma because obviously the big storyline, the offense is going to be one thing, the defense.
Yeah.
Worst in the Big 12. I mean, they gave up the most first downs in the country out of any team. It was Oklahoma. That's something you never thought you would hear as an Oklahoma fan. That
I don't know if it's been kind of
we know the defense, but you would think with Brent Venables there that wouldn't be the case. You wouldn't think this would be the year you would hear that stat. Maybe the 2018 defense, Mike Stoops' half season, you would maybe hear that, but the defense has to improve, and everyone knows that. Brent knows that, of course, but we will see what Oklahoma does. If the defense is improved, which I think it should be. I'm not going to say it will be until, obviously, I see it, but I would hope that it is improved. But how many times in a row have I said I hope the defense improved, only be proven wrong?
And what I'm curious to see with the defense is not so much the returning guys. I mean, I think guys like Ethan Downs, somebody like that knows the pressure on them. I'm interested to see if any of those freshmen or now redshirt freshmen guys that were, maybe played sparingly last year that came in as freshmen or just now freshmen this year that are the first couple sets of Brent Venable recruits, right? That's his guys, so to speak. Can any of them step up? That's what I'm curious to see on that defense side of the ball more so than anything, just because if those guys step on through. I mean, we saw a couple of guys last year start to kind of flash a little bit, saw them sparingly, and they made some plays, made some mistakes. But if you get, a few of those guys really start stepping up, that could be a big difference.
It absolutely can. So Oklahoma, of course, will be in the mix here, I would think, looking at that schedule definitely helps them out a lot. I mean, this is an Oklahoma team that, talking to people around, I think everyone's expectation is kind of, 10-win season, get back to Arlington, at least be in the mix. But it's going to be intriguing to see how this works out. Same deal with Texas. This is your last year in the Big 12. It's kind of almost a lame duck year in that, you're already looking forward to, we get Alabama in 2024. That's sitting right there. Tennessee's right there coming to Norman. It'll be intriguing to see kind of how the fan base goes along. I think, obviously, you'll be invested in this year, but having that in the back of your mind, just knowing what awaits with how this season goes.
But I think that's why both teams want to succeed this season.
Yeah.
You want to leave things as a leaping off point and upward momentum, right?
Yeah.
You don't want to be trending down going into the SEC. I think even more so this year on the OU side compared to the Texas side, that's a big worry, right? Is, hey, we want to make sure we're trending up going into the SEC. So it's a big year for everybody at OU.
It absolutely is. And the next team to get to, we already talked about him a little bit. Tyler, you mentioned him, the dark horse pick, so to speak. And, I mean, they do have a horse they ride on. It's the Red Raiders of Texas Tech. And Texas Tech, I mean, Joey McGuire, talk about what he did. First year, you go 8-5. He held true to his word at media day. He said, we're going to beat Oklahoma, and we're going to knock the stadium down. We're going to do a little bit of renovating. They beat Oklahoma, and they went and knocked that part down. Texas Tech just continuing to impress, I would say, is the best word. I mean, you had Tyler Shuck, who did well last year when he was playing. Donovan Smith, quarterback by committee. Whatever you needed to do, they got it done. And you look at who Texas Tech plays week 2, it's Oregon coming to Lubbock. Night game on Fox. You want to talk about one of the rowdiest places to play at, not just in the Big 12, but really in America.
Oh, yeah.
Lubbock, Texas at night.
Oh, yeah.
That's a place you don't want to be, Tyler.
Oh, I want to be in that because that's going to be a rocking environment.
You don't want to be there if you're Oregon. Let me rephrase that.
That's true. That's true. But now, and hey, I tried to warn everybody last year that, you know, again, with the media position I'm in, obviously in Woodward, you hear a lot of the West Texas guys, the Panhandle guys over there in Texas, the high school coaches that know McGuire and those that interact with him via him coming and recruiting their guys, and even some of the Oklahoma and Kansas people, you know, they really bought into what he was selling from their standpoint, and you could just tell he's got that energy about him. And I don't want to make this comparison because, you know, nobody can be Mike Leach, but this guy has brought the energy back that we saw during those prime Mike Leach days, you know, where that black and red, boy, that's a lot more intimidating now, I think, for a lot of teams. This is the team that when you have them on their schedule, you go, man, I don't know if I really am ready for this game because they play fast, they play aggressive. You know, Tyree Wilson's going to be tough to replace at defensive end. That was a big part of their attack last year. But, you know, they're going to be a team that's going to give you everything. Now, you know, I don't know where the win total winds up this year schedule-wise. I would say for the most part got a favorable draw, right? You talk about the Oregon game, you get that one at home, so that's big. That could be a big tone setter. Kansas State's going to be tough. That's going to be a fun game. We talked about that. And then you go to Kansas, depending on where they're at late in the season, could be interesting. And you go to Texas. Those are kind of some big games I'm looking at, circling. Even UCF, though, I mean, late season could be interesting. So kind of a middle-of-the-road draw for Texas Tech where got some big games, but you got some easier games. I don't know. I don't think it would be a disappointment for this team to turn around and go 8 wins again, right? That would still be a good sign for them. It's one of those deals that I think if they're in the race, that's a good sign for them in the future in the new Big 12 once OU and Texas move on.
I think so. It's one of those, if, like you said, if they go 8 wins again, you can kind of understand that. I mean, yeah. Oregon at home, Kansas State, TCU, Texas, that's 4 losses right there. That'd put you back at 8 and 4.
Kansas game, one of those.
Yeah, one of those ones that just sits there and kind of don't expect it. But I look at it, and I see Texas Tech. This is a team that could, in my opinion, they could be a 10-win team.
They could be. I think
you look at it, and I think the thing that helps them on their schedule, Tyler, you look at it, Oregon is a home game. Kansas State is a home game. TCU is a home game. Your only big road game that jumps out at you is Texas.
Right.
That's the only big one. Now, obviously, at Baylor, that's a rivalry game, things like that. But you look at this schedule, I'm not going to say it's 100% favorable for Texas Tech, but you get that nice little boost at home, especially there in Lubbock where they have a great home field advantage. This is a Texas Tech team that you mentioned it, that Joey McGuire's brought the passion back to Texas Tech. That could will them to a win or two, and you know how Texas Tech is. Once they get rolling, they can get hard to stop.
Well, and, talking about willing to win, that happened last year. There were spots where they were down due to injuries offensively and some of those things, and they were able to compete and fight, and ultimately some of them they didn't win. But my only big concern for them, Cade, in terms of pushing for 10 wins is we talk about defense. You got to have in this league, especially with how high-powered a lot of these offenses can be at times. They're just reloading a touch there, and I think parts of the season, if they get into a little bit of injury trouble on that side of the ball, I don't know if they've got the depth quite yet to make up for that. I think offensively they're at that point, right? And they showed a bit last year where they got, a little bit more depth than people thought. But my big question for them is, can they get it done on the defensive side of the ball? You lost some NFL talent. You lost some guys to the transfer portal. So we'll see what aligns there on that side of the ball. That's going to be the key for them, I think, is can you bring a competitive defense into conference play?
I think so, and I think it's one of those, we'll find out pretty quick where Texas Tech stands on that. If they get into a little bit of injury trouble, we'll see pretty quick. Because, I mean, like a Houston or someone like that, they can kind of play that tempo game with them if they want to.
Exactly.
We'll see where Texas Tech is pretty early on in the season. But moving on to the next team, it's TCU. TCU 5th in the preseason poll. And, I mean, you look at game 1 for TCU, you've got a made-for-TV
Now
event.
a future conference matchup.
A future conference matchup. You got Deion Sanders, Coach Prime, whatever you want to call him. They come to town. Last year, it was a 7-6 game at halftime. Remember that, Tyler. Chandler Morris goes down. Max Duggan comes in. TCU runs the ball, and it's 38-6, and TCU was off to the races last year, getting all the way to the Big 12 championship game. Yes, they lost to K-State. Got the giant win over Michigan, of course, and then we don't talk about what happened in that championship game.
Yeah, I think that said more about Georgia than TCU really last year. People will disagree with that, but, man, Georgia was just so stacked. I think that proved it, to be honest.
Yeah, we will get to Georgia there when we need to talk about that. I have the list of everyone. It's about this long.
Yeah.
But looking at TCU, I mean, yes, you lose Max Duggan. Yes, you lose a lot of talent on offense. You've still got some great defenders as well. I mean, you've got Johnny Hodges at linebacker. You've got Josh Newton at defensive back. You still have Chandler Morris, who was the starting quarterback.
He won the starting job.
So he won the starting job. He's back. He had a little bit of experience at Oklahoma under Lincoln Riley. And so TCU, I mean, you look at it, the first 4 games here, really, first 5, 6, how you can just kind of keep going down the list. Okay, I can see them winning that game. Okay, I can see them winning that game. I'm not going to say TCU is going to be exactly the same as last year. They lost a lot, and some of that was your 5th, 6th year guys even. But to me, looking at the schedule, Tyler, I don't know if you'll agree with me at this or not, but there's a good reason to believe they can be undefeated going into that K-State game.
At the very least, because I'm really curious to see how Colorado turns out with their massive overhaul of the roster. Obviously, they got a lot more talent, I think, on the roster now than they did last year. What that means for them, I'm sure we'll have a healthy debate on that when we get to it. But, yeah, no, I mean, really the first big get-up game, I think, is probably going to be at Iowa State, not because Iowa State's going to be good, but just because, obviously, Ames, weird things happens, in Ames. So if they could get past that all right, then you got to get up for Kansas State. I mean, really it's the back half of the schedule is what I think could do TCU in and kind of, decide where they're at in what should be for a lot of people probably considering a rebuilding year. But you mentioned Chandler Morris. I think a lot of that's going to ride on him. How's he come back from the injury? How's he look in those first few games now being the guy, The problem is for him is, as we talked about, you lost a good touch of your skill guys around him, right? So it's just kind of one of those deals where Sonny Dykes did a really good job last year of taking a roster that nobody thought was good enough to do much. I mean, let's not twist it. This was a team. Max Duggan was so bad at one point in his career that he got Jalen Reagor drafted in the first round because the NFL scouts looked at that quarterback play and said, man, this guy's dealing with some horrible quarterback play. Surely he's better than this. Come to find out, not the case. And Max Duggan just, completely turned around. But I think for me, TCU is a real wild card. Like I said, if that first part of the season goes well, I think that Kansas State game could be interesting. And then after that, though, you got at Texas Tech. You do host Texas. That's an advantage. You host Baylor. But then you got to finish with Oklahoma. So that back half of the schedule is a murderer's row once you get to the middle of October.
And, I mean, it's one of those things, Tyler, that it would not shock me at all. You see TCU, they come out. I'm not going to say they look exactly like last year, but you go, okay, this has the exact same feel. Here comes TCU right down the stretch, just beating people up. And then they get to Kansas State. They probably lose that game, in my opinion. As of right now, obviously, This is all the way in July. So
it's on paper.
Things could be completely different by then. You get that bye week, Thursday night in Lubbock. Never fun time. Already mentioned Saturday night in Lubbock. Any night game in Lubbock is a place you don't want to be at if you're a visiting
Cade,
team.
you're saying not to go to Lubbock at all. How dare you?
I'm saying don't go if you're the opposing team, which I'm sure Texas Tech fans would agree with because I'm sure they'd want to win by forfeit. I'm just saying it's a rough place to play. I've heard stories about, it's a very feisty crowd.
Oh, yeah.
And they love it out there. But you get Texas Tech, Texas, Baylor, and don't sleep on that Baylor game. Right. We know what happened the last 2 years they've played where it has been the team that should be favored by 10. It's either a one-point game, TCU had the whole everything had to be perfect for them to set up a field goal, and then the year before it was Baylor who looked just way better than TCU, and who upset them? TCU did, out of all people. That rivalry is just one of those weird, wacky games, and having that smashed in between Texas and Oklahoma this year. So not only do you have to get up for Texas Tech being that Thursday game, that'll probably be a big game. Not only do you have to get up for Texas because, well, it's Texas. Everyone gets up for Texas. You got that rivalry game, and then you got to get up for Black Friday. That's a lot of big game. And, I mean, that's a tough schedule for anybody to have to do that much, adrenaline basically in a row every single week. It just, something's got to give at some point there for TCU. They're not going to be as good as last year's team. I think that is going to break them eventually at the end of the year. It would not surprise me if they lost 2 of the last 3. They could even, I could see them after that bye week losing every single game and going 7-5.
Well, that's the thing, right? Those last 5 games are really going to make or break, where they finish. And I would say, given the schedule, if you finish 7-5, 8-4, I would call that successful in a year after you've lost so much and you're just trying to fill in some guys. And don't get me wrong, like any other team, they've tried to fill that in through the portal and other means, but it's just one of those where that stretch, I mean, as we're talking about, is just rough. I mean, I'd be scared if I was OU and had that stretch right in the back half of the season. So if they could get through it with a winning record this year and be in that 7-5, 8-4 range, I call that pretty successful for TCU.
And that's where I'm at. I think anything 7 wins or more, this is a rebuilding year. You just got to, I think last year obviously set expectations a little bit too wonky, but you'll take that. That's the situation you want to be in if you're Sonny Dykes. And we talked about wild cards a little bit already with the last 2. For me, Tyler, if you want an ultimate wild card, you go with one of the best coaches in the Big 12 who knows how to just push people's buttons when it comes to the defensive side of things. I have no idea what to expect from Baylor. And I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, Tyler, because Baylor can be anything at this point. Baylor can be a 1-11 team. Baylor can be an 11-1 team. Baylor can be 6-7 like they were last year. There is nothing Baylor can't be at this point.
Yeah, and them and Kansas, I think, are the clear 1A, 1B of just wild cards. Like, these are the teams that if anybody pull a TCU from last year, one of these 2 teams could do it. Because they just, on paper, there's some question marks, but you could also see ways where, maybe things break right for them a little bit. And it just kind of works out. And Baylor's a tough one, though, because you got that Utah game early. You got that Texas game early. You're at UCF. You got Texas Tech. So their schedule, I think, a little rough, right? And I think Kansas is going to be kind of the same way where both teams that were question marks did get some rough draws. So I think really Baylor's season hinges on Blake Shapen. He's going to be the guy going into the season. He was a bit up and down last year, and we know when Baylor succeeded, they've had a calm, confident, cool quarterback, right? Or they've had a Heisman winner, Robert Griffin.
That one works as well.
That works pretty well. But, those other guys that have done it for him, especially in the 2010s on, have just been some calm, cool, collected guys that know how to run things and make the big plays. So if Shapen could be that guy, that bodes well for Baylor, I think, in a lot of these tougher games, these tougher scenarios.
And, Tyler, to add to that, Blake Shapen, I think the consistency is going to be one thing. For me, Baylor, they lost a lot on the defensive side, a lot of seniors, a lot of upperclassmen that went on. Not only do you have to have that consistency on offense, which, you have the strong run game. You have Richard Reese that you can go to whenever you need to bail Shapen out there. But this is a Baylor defense that's going to have a lot of trial by fire early on in the season. Now, the good thing about it, you get Utah at home. You get Texas at home. You get Texas Tech at home. You get a little bit more leniency early on in the season. But once you get that bye, you go to Cincinnati for the first time. They're going to be up for that game, especially if Baylor has gotten one of those big upsets there. Baylor's going to have a little bit of a rough schedule now. At K-State, at TCU, those aren't going to be fun games for them. Baylor, they could go 6-6 again in the regular season. They could win 8 games. They are the ultimate wild card, in my opinion.
Yeah, they're kind of really rangy, man. For me, I can see anywhere from, like I said, around 6-6, just kind of a repeat versus, hey, you pull off that Utah win. Maybe you shock the world against Texas. Then all of a sudden things are like, oh, okay, now we're looking up, So it really would be interesting to see where they're at by about, like I said, that bye week. That's going to tell us a lot of what this Baylor team is or is not.
Yeah, and it wouldn't shock me if they were 3-3 in that bye week with the 3 wins you'd guess and the 3 losses you'd guess.
Right.
But it wouldn't also shock me either, if they're 4-2 or who knows, maybe even a 5-1. Maybe they catch Utah and Texas Tech or something like that. I mean, it's 11 a.m. in Waco, Texas. In September, it gets hot, Tyler.
Oh, yeah.
And if you're Utah, I'm sure you're used to the heat as well, but
I don't know about
that Texas heat is a little bit different sometimes.
It's different.
We'll have to see there. But Baylor, if I had to guess and put a number on them right now, I'd say 7-8 just to be safe with it. But like we discussed, the true ultimate wild card there is Baylor. And that leads us to, I think what we're both going to agree, Tyler, is the exact opposite. Oklahoma State, currently at 7th. Now, Oklahoma State did get one first-place vote. We know who that was. From what I remember, it was like a Dallas Cowboys beat writer or something who said, Mike Gundy's one of the best coaches. I expect him to get the job done there, which that's a debate for another day on the Mike Gundy situation.
It's a Dallas Cowboys beat writer. He's used to putting on heavy expectations and then seeing that come up short. But that's for a different time.
But Oklahoma State, 7-6 last year. You lose Spencer Sanders. You had a season that started great. You were 5-0, and then injury after injury after injury. And, just slowly watching the train derail to it goes down a cliff quickly. And Oklahoma State, you have to rebuild a lot now. And, that offensive line, you got to make sure you have some depth there. That defense you got to build on. You got another new defensive coordinator. You've got a whole lot going on if you're Oklahoma State. Alan Bowman is probably going to be the starting quarterback. You got to make sure he doesn't get injured, because if that happens, and we've seen it happen, you're back down to Garrett Rangel. You're back down to Gunnar Gundy. You're back down to insert option 3,
Maybe
which
Zane Flores, the true freshman.
He
was a good recruit, but still.
We will have to see. Brennan Presley, obviously a wide receiver. He's going to do his thing. He's going to be a lot of fun to watch. This Oklahoma State defense, I'm not going to say they might be, the highlight of this team again, like they were in 2021 at times. I think it's going to have to happen, because this offense for Oklahoma State, I have no earthly idea what they're going to roll out, Tyler. Anything can happen with this offense this year. Sometimes that's a good thing. Sometimes that might be a bad thing.
Well, and what really kind of got me worried about this cup season for Oklahoma State was not so much, like I said, they went through some real unfortunate strings of injuries late season. That's why they fell off. I could give that a pass. You can't really coach past injury. If you get wiped out, there's not much you could do. That is tough to overcome. You can say, well, you got to have the backups ready. Yeah, but some of those guys are backups for the reason they need time to develop, right? And I think we saw a little bit of that. Guys like Garrett Rangel have to step in. Some of those guys, Gunner, they weren't, horrible. It's just they need a little bit more seasoning, right? And it's tough to just throw them into that fire when they got to be thrown in there. My big concern was that kind of off-season, seemingly offensive exodus we had, right? Sanders goes. Dominique Richardson goes. 2 or 3 receivers go. And from the people I talked to that have some sources there in Stillwater, maybe there's some friction there with how the players felt Casey Dunn treats those guys and how he runs the show, that they didn't like it, but Gundy kind of is on board with it. So it'll be interesting. I think this year we'll see a lot of that. If you see complete and utter dysfunction this year offensively the entire year, I think those whispers of, Casey Dunn doesn't need to be there anymore will ring true, and you'll see him get moved on. I do think that if Oklahoma State has a shot at being good, they have to at least be opportunistic on defense. We've seen that, especially here in the mid-2010s on through, where when they've got that opportunistic defense and guys that can make plays, right? Whether it's interception, maybe they make a timely forced fumble, that really boosts them a lot. But man, if this offense is a train wreck early, it's not going to get much better, because I think that would, to me, signal that those whispers of the dysfunction between Casey Dunn and his guys as an OC might have been true.
And the thing that worries me about this schedule, Tyler, you look at it, is the way everything is kind of just, I don't want to say 100% packed together, because looking at this schedule any other year for Oklahoma State, you can look at it and go reasonably, okay, there's about, 6, 7, 8, maybe even a ninth win you can find here. But just keeping all of that in the back of your mind, especially the friction you've talked about, maybe they go up there and lose in Ames. Maybe, you go back-to-back losses to K-State and Kansas, and that spills over into Morgantown, and then you've lost 3 in a row going into homecoming. This is one of those years that I think Oklahoma State, just getting to 6 or 7 wins again, would be a successful season for them, which is not where they've been the past 15 years, ever since Mike Gundy's been there, basically.
Sure.
It's just one of those weird years for Oklahoma State that them being 7th, just any other year would be laughable because you'd expect them to be higher, but this year feels the opposite. I'd expect them to be lower.
Yeah, they're over win total in a lot of places, about 6, right? Maybe 6.5. But if they could break over 6 and get to 7, maybe even 8, that would be, I think, for what all they went through in the offseason, that would be a massive success. I mean, I really would be impressed by that. That would probably honestly rank as one of Gundy's better coaching jobs. I know it sounds crazy to have a 7-8-1 season. I call that an outstanding coaching job. But, if they do that with all that they lost and some of that turnover and a new DC, I'd be mildly impressed. But for me, I think their peak, man, I think if they make a bowl game, any Cowboy fans out there, you should be happy with that, because that means that they have overcome some adversity. And, honestly, kind of an unfortunate draw, I think, for a lot of their schedule. I mean, a lot of tough pitfall type of games, if you will, on there. As long as you're not 4-8, I'd say, hey, you've done what you did and did enough to at least overcome a lot of that adversity.
Yeah, it'll be one of those that if Oklahoma State gets off to a 4-0 start, and, I mean, you look at it, Central Arkansas at Arizona State, South Alabama at Iowa State, if you could get off to that type of start, chances are your season is going to go well. But if they lose one of those first 4, Tyler, I think you start to get a little bit worried. You start to look at that and go, okay, something might be wrong here, even if you're 3-1, which would feel ridiculous to panic about any other year for Oklahoma State, I would think.
Right.
This is one where you look at it going, okay, we're 3-1, and K-State and Kansas are right around the door. This is not a good sign.
Yeah. Well, and, even there, though, if you lose that Iowa State game and you're 3-3 by the time you go into West Virginia, I personally wouldn't be too upset about that if I'm Oklahoma State, because you got a couple games on the back end, Houston, BYU. You got Cincinnati at home. The West Virginia game could be tough, but, those 4 games are winnable is what I guess I'm trying to say. So if you could squeeze, a 3-1 out of that early schedule and, again, get to that 6 or 7 mark, I'd call that a win.
And that's where I'm at with it as well. This is one of those, the target is 6. Anything higher than that is a success this year.
Yeah. Yep.
And looking at UCF, our first of the 4 newcomers, Tyler, making their way over to the 14-team Big 12. We're never going to get that thing solved, are we? Especially with Colorado joining now. We'll never get the Big 12 at 12, but that's not what we're here to talk about. Gus Malzahn, the Gus Bus has arrived to the Big 12, Tyler. And let me tell you what Gus Malzahn,
the bounce house.
with a bounce house and a top 10 rushing attack. Yeah. Now, obviously, no Isaiah Bowser, but they do have John Rice Plumlee, who, watching him as a freshman at Ole Miss go absolutely just nuts on Joe Burrow LSU, keep in mind, that super team that they had.
Historically
amazing. Good.
Yes.
Watching him get into a bit of a shootout there where, they scored 45 and still lost by 20. That's just a thing that happened that year. That's 2019 Ole Miss for you. That's a different time. But he transferred over, and UCF, kind of having a quarterback by committee last year, still went to 9-5, still got to the American Championship game. They lost to Tulane, which ended up being, one of the best Tulane teams you're ever going to see in your life. This is a UCF team I'm excited to see what they can do. here in the Big 12. And I mean, you look at the first 3 games, Kent State, Boise State, Villanova. So you get one of the better teams in the FCS in Villanova. You get a fun game at Boise there. Always good to see teams like that playing each other. And then they go to Kansas State, which is your welcome to the Big 12 moment.
But couldn't have got much tougher. Maybe going to Texas, but wow. Yeah, this UCF team, I wouldn't say underrated, but of all, like I said earlier, of all the newcomer teams, the 4, I think this is the best prepared team to actually make a bit of a splash. I wouldn't say necessarily outright compete for the Big 12 title, but at least, be up there in the mix, right? I think they could shoot, just depending on how things work out for them. I think they may have a chance to at least try to nab 8 wins, right, with the schedule. We'll see. I just think the Mountain West is a bit weak, so I'm not too keen on them really struggling too much at Boise State. I guess what I'm trying to say. That Kansas State game will absolutely be a welcome to the Big 12 moment. They might lose that one in disastrous fashion. People will be, they're not ready. But you get some opportunities to bounce back after that with Baylor and Kansas. The OU game will be, we talked about that. That's one that seems tough on paper, but Gus Malzahn's a big game coach. He wins big games. That's what he's made his career on. He knows how to do that. He also knows how to lose a few of them. But if there's a coach that I would trust to take me into a new conference, I can see why UCF went for Gus Malzahn. This is a team that, with him at the helm, I think could surprise people.
And to me, this back half for UCF, after Oklahoma, West Virginia is a winnable game. Cincy, well, they have a lot of experience battling it out with the Bearcats there. Oklahoma State at home, yes, you go to Texas Tech, and then Houston again. So you get a few familiar foes in there, and then West Virginia, which is on paper the worst team in the Big 12, at least where the preseason poll and where we'll kind of slide around here. But this is a UCF team. You looked at it, we talked about it after that K-State game. Depending on how much of a wild card Baylor is and how Kansas is, they could be 5-1 going into that game in Norman. That would not shock me at all. You have a week of rest going into that. That could turn into one of those must-see games in the Big 12, Tyler.
It could, yeah. And that's why I kind of worry about for OU with that game. Like, people are going to look at that and say, well, who's hosting them? They should blow out UCF. Like, again, this is a team that I think is going to sneak up on a couple of these old Big 12 teams. They'll realize, like, okay, UCF might be a little legit. You get Florida, folks, and I say it all the time. If you're I have certain positions, right? If I'm recruiting a quarterback and I'm a small market team or I'm a group of 5 team, give me a 3-star Texas quarterback in terms of high school guys. That will do just fine. And when you talk about Florida, man, if you're pulling 3-star skill guys out of that, corners, receivers, those type of positions, those guys can be difference makers quick. Like, it's deep they're recruiting in Florida, and so they get that hotbed to work with. And we've seen UCF do in the past. They know how to maximize those guys. And Gus Malzahn, again, is a guy that can do that. He can absolutely do that.
And, I mean, you had this move to the Big 12 that opens up, some of those 4 stars a little bit.
Oh, yeah.
You could say, hey, look, we're doing better than Miami. We did better than Florida last year. Now you're kind of, you could say, hey, we're 1A, 1B with Florida State if you want to throw that out there.
It's I don't know. I don't know about that this year. We'll see.
This is UCF. They loved, they're the school that went around and claimed that national championship in 2017. They know how to market.
Yeah.
This is a place that they know what they're doing here. And UCF, they could be a 9, even as bold to say possibly even a 10-win team here in the Big 12.
That's hot.
They have that opportunity.
I see a few. I mean, at Tech, going to be real tough. At K-State, going to be real tough. At OU, going to be tough. Those are 3 games that I'm not favoring them in. And, at Kansas, depending on where Kansas is at there, could be tough. So I wouldn't put 10-win expectations on UCF.
I wouldn't either. I'm just saying the possibility is there, Tyler. Kansas State, Texas Tech, Oklahoma, you catch one of those 3 on a bad day and do your job against other teams you are favored or I would say equal playing field with. That possibility is there, and you mentioned it. Gus Malzahn can win these big games. Yes, he can lose some big games as well, but you're used to losing big games against Alabama, not Kansas State. We'll see, though.
I think the one underlying issue we'll see with all 4 of these teams, whether it's UCF, Houston, BYU, or Cincinnati, and this is a real concern. People kind of say, oh, well, that's not true, but, just the depth, right? When we start talking, getting injuries and things like that, it's different when you're a group of 5 team versus being a Power 5 team. You've been able to stack some classes up of recruits. A lot of the group of 5 teams don't have that luxury. So I think that's the only concern is, do you have the depth to compete still if a couple of those big contributors go down, which obviously we want everybody to be healthy. We don't want anybody to be injured, but we know that's just the reality of the sport. Injuries happen. So, that's my only concern there. I think that's a legit concern for all four of those teams.
It is, and we'll have to see how the season plays out here. But obviously, UCF, it's fun to see them in the Big 12, Tyler. I mean, it's hard to think a decade ago it was some guy named Blake Bortles in a Fiesta Bowl against Baylor at the time.
Blake Bortles.
Now they're here. It's good. It's fun to see. I mean, you get some of the fun parts of realignment, too. Everyone kind of wants to do the doom and gloom of, the building of the super conferences.
They wax on about the death of what college football, has meant to be. And it's like, folks, I tell you what, if you don't think college football hadn't been driven by money since the Pony Express, you're lying to yourself. And it was probably before that when it started getting driven by money. So, it's I for one welcome the realignment palooza.
And we've mentioned one wild card, Tyler. We've actually mentioned several, but we talked about the 1A and 1B of wild cards. We already talked about Baylor. The other one, the Jayhawks of Kansas, picked 9th. Under Lance Leipold, Kansas has undergone a transformation from literal joke football school, 1 or 2 wins, they beat Texas in 2016, to a serious threat with a dynamic offense when Jalen Daniels is healthy, Tyler. I mean, it's just crazy to see what they did last year. Got to 5-0, got to host College Game Day, got to be ranked. I mean, just living the dream of every single school. They're getting to see just right before your eyes a program being built in real time. And now this is a Kansas team that they've made that first big step. They're ready to take the next big step this year. The only question that remains, can they stay healthy? Because, Tyler, if they can stay healthy, I want you to look at this schedule with me. Missouri State, that's a win. Illinois, that's a win. Nevada, that's a win. BYU, that's at home, that's a win. Texas, probably a loss. UCF, we'll call we'll call a coin flip game. At Oklahoma State, I'll say a win for now.
I would say they were favored right now.
I would say right now. That puts you at what? That puts you at 5 guaranteed, 5-1-1 basically. We'll
have the tie.
We'll use the tie coin flip argument here. That puts you possibly at 6-1 with a bye, getting ready
Hosting
for homecoming against Oklahoma.
Yeah.
And you remember what happened the last 2 times you played Oklahoma. You had them down 10-0 at halftime in Lawrence and got beat by 12 at the end of the day, which took everything in OU's effort to make that happen. And you got beat by him last year in Norman by 10 with Jason Bean in the game.
Yeah.
And when you can drop 42 points on Oklahoma with a backup quarterback.
With the Bean.
With Jason Bean, you have that possibility. I mean, you look at Kansas, then you've got Iowa State, who you beat. You have Cincinnati on the road, which you can win. This can be a 7 and maybe an 8 if you catch someone on a bad day Kansas team.
Yeah.
A 7 or 8 win team for Kansas would be just monumental.
Well,
I mean, that just goes to show what Kansas has done under Lance Leipold, that we're even having this conversation about an above 500 Kansas in just 3 years.
Well, you talk about of a team that's going to rely on a quarterback to be everything this year, it's definitely Kansas. If Jalen Daniels can be healthy, he was getting Heisman hype last year. I mean, let's not forget, 5 games through, I think he was rightfully getting Heisman hype. He's an X factor, folks. I mean, that's a guy that keeps defensive coordinators up at night. I don't care who it is. That's a guy that competes. I mean, he competes on a high level. So if he can stay healthy for the season, the only real concern after that, I think, for Kansas is, can their defense keep up? That was kind of the issue. You start getting injured offensively, then it put the pressure on the defense, and we just kind of saw that they're not there yet defensively. They had some guys that were difference makers, absolutely, but you just didn't quite have it. And I think that's still a concern, right, where they're not quite there defensively. I think Leipold's a guy. I'm going in the right direction and all that. But, man, if Jalen Daniels stays healthy, this is a team that I do not want to see come to my school any given week, because at the very least, that they got a shot to put up some points. And when there's a team that could score at a high rate, makes it tough, man. It's always a sweaty game at that point.
Yeah, I was saying, anytime you get someone that can turn it basically into a shootout whenever they feel like it, it's not a fun place you want to be at. But Kansas has that opportunity. Like you mentioned, we'll see how the defense goes. just continuing to try to build depth there, try to build that thing up to what it can be at Kansas. And it's going to be intriguing, man. I mean, I never thought I would say Kansas might be one of the more interesting teams in the Big 12. 5 years ago, would I have said that? Probably not. But here we are. It's funny how that works sometimes.
Yeah, I just picture at the end of the season, if Kansas is competing for the Big 12 title, it's Happy Gilmore instead of the crocodile and everybody else looking over, happy there. It's just Mark Mangino with a hamburger in his hands and Todd Reeson at whatever law firm he's at, just in the sky smiling down on landslide.
It needs to be the one image of Mangino where he's by the Orange Bowl logo and he's just staring at it, like, what are you doing? But either way, Kansas should be a fun team again this year, barring injuries or anything going wrong there. Kansas will be another fun team to keep an eye on. Unfortunately, now, Tyler, we have to talk about
the bottom half.
We have to talk about going from a team known for its offense to a team known for its lack of offense last year, that being Iowa State. Matt Campbell, of course, his 8th year with the Cyclones. Iowa State 4-8 last year, Tyler. And this is an Iowa State team that when I was trying to find, who is the guy on offense for Iowa State, I could not identify one. I really couldn't. I tried. I could find great defense players, a T.J. Tampa, a Bo Frailer, a Miles Purchase, someone like that. You can find defensive guys. Hunter Deckers at quarterback. You've got to step up. Now, obviously, Iowa State's, they've made some moves here or there. You've got different offensive coordinator. You got everything you're running around with here. But Iowa State, I don't know if it's just a state of Iowa thing, Tyler, and we'll get to this, obviously, when we get to the Big Ten and talk about Iowa as well and the intriguing things going on there. And we'll see it September 9th when we get our classic Cyhawk game there. Iowa State's got to fix that offense because the defense is not a problem. Iowa State's a sound, good defensive team. But, man, when you tucker out a defense by going 3 and out or just getting off the field,
how good that defense is,
it doesn't matter. Yeah. Once you get tired and once you start wearing down, everything goes downhill from there.
Yeah, and, I hate to say this because I don't want to dunk on our boy Andrew, but I told people about Matt Campbell last year that I wouldn't say fraudulent, but he's getting close. Like, it's just not – he could have a good defense, and we've seen at times when they have a good rushing attack, obviously with some of the big-time talent they've had there. Breece Hall, obviously, amazing.
Yeah, David Montgomery.
I mean, NFL-caliber guys. But we've also seen that for whatever reason, this school cannot develop quarterbacks. Brock Purdy was a guy that you looked at on paper, produced a lot, but because of his association with being at Iowa State, the ups and downs of that offense, people are like, oh, we won't touch him until the last pick of the draft, gets taken by the 49ers, and he pops in the NFL. Why is that? He had the skill. It's just we didn't see it at Iowa State because they aren't conducive to, for whatever reason, making their quarterbacks, I don't know, more of a bright spot for that team. So I don't know where the blame lies quite yet, but unfortunately, I think after this season, they're going to have serious talks about getting rid of Matt Campbell. And it's crazy to say after what we've, seen at one point, with him where it was like, hey, this guy's the next great NFL coach. It never materialized. I don't know why. I don't know what it is about his style, Cade, that just doesn't work, but there's something clearly there that doesn't work. I mean, they should have, you could argue, had a Big 12 championship under their belt at their peak. They had all the pieces. It didn't work. And we saw what happens when they lose what we now understand was big-time NFL talent.
To me, Tyler, it's one of those few loyalty issues, I guess you could say. I mean, I've seen Iowa State fans, shouting from the hilltops, the closest hilltop you could find near Ames, wherever that is. I'm not an Iowa
not
geography.
Not a mountain, but a hilltop.
Wherever they could find it. Please get rid of Tom Manning. If we can launch him out of this state tomorrow, we will all be happy people because it's the same problem with Iowa. You have an offensive coordinator that just, for whatever reason, does not seem to understand how the offense needs to work. And, I mean, You saw that with Iowa State had, this giant hyped-up team. Oh, look at all this talent we have. Look at all these amazing tight ends we have, which they did. They had great tight ends. They had great
good receivers.
They had a great run game. They had offensive line. They had everything. And they went 7-5. Yeah. And even Iowa State, who's not used to going 7-5, they're just staring, going, "This is such a disappointment.
Right?
We deserve better." And they do deserve better than this. Matt Campbell. This is 7 years now. He's 46-42.
Yeah.
which is still a good record at Iowa State.
But for where they
But
were.
from where
point,
they were and where we have seen them, even in his own tenure, you're right. I don't think they'll fire him. I think this is kind of a Mike Gundy situation now where you let him leave on his own accord because of what he's done for Iowa State. I think that's where it might get to with them, but we'll have to see. Now, Iowa State, if they can improve the offense, and that's a big if because we know where Iowa State can be if they do improve this offense. We know they can go back to being a 6-7 win team, the classic upset spoiler there. However, if things continue like they were, hopefully maybe someone like a Jaden Higgins who transferred in can help out in terms of receivers. But, you look at the first 3 games, Northern Iowa. We know Iowa State's history with Northern Iowa, Tyler. That is never an easy game there. That's an in-state rivalry. Iowa, of course, is a big game that if you love watching someone try to win 3-0, that is a game for you.
You love punts.
If you love punts, if you love safeties, if you love the weirdest special teams play you can find, it'll probably happen in that game.
You love 5-3 baseball games that are now football games.
Yeah, if you love that. Ohio, that's a possibility, There's a possibility you're 2-1, you get Oklahoma State at home, and you win that game. And you're 3-1, Oklahoma, you go on the road there. There's also a possibility you're 1-3 and everything is just on fire already, and it's just a nightmare of a season beginning there. Iowa State, they're kind of the bad version of a wild card, I want to say, where you know what's probably going to happen. You still have some hope in your mind that things can be fixed. You've seen this staff do it before. But you just kind of, that entire year, that just cloud of doubt hangs over you, just waiting for, okay, this is the moment where everything goes wrong and everything just flips, and then we start losing and everything just goes absolutely haywire. And you're looking at another 3, 4, 5 win season.
You want the hot take here?
What's your hot take, Tyler?
The blowout in Northern Iowa. Iowa State fans will talk them into, hey, Hunter Deckers looked good that game. Maybe the defense isn't as bad as we think it will be after we lost all this talent. They'll get into the Iowa game. It'll be a mud fight. It's just a rock fight, just ugly. Bowl and shoe ugly, as Jim Ross would like to say. They'll pull that out. They'll find a way because Iowa's bad, right? Iowa's bad. Then they're going to get pantsed on national television by Ohio, and it's all downhill from there. I think Ohio kills them. And then after that, you can forget about it. I think you could see this be probably another 3-4 win team again. That's a very real possibility in my mind.
And, the schedule, we've talked about a lot of friendly schedules. This is the opposite here. You've got all your, Texas is your big home game, obviously, they're late in the season. But every, almost considerably near coin flip game like a BYU or maybe even a Baylor or Cincy, those are all on the road.
Right.
You've got to go there. Yes, you have that nice buy-in between Cincy and Baylor to kind of help between the road trips, but it's going to get rough for Iowa State.
Yeah.
It's not going to be a fun place to be at, and maybe they can get back to 4 or 5, but as of right now, knowing kind of where everything stands, I would say it's probably another 3-4 win season.
I think they get past, like I said, Northern Iowa, and then maybe you win BYU or Cincinnati. I don't think you win both of those. If you do, great, but you're still probably 4-8 at that point. That's where I've gotten pegged at.
Yeah, it is. It's going to be brutal again, at least the way we see it. Or there's the possibility, because this is how Iowa State works sometimes, Tyler. I could see them losing to Northern Iowa like 7-3 and just the end of the world. And then they come out of nowhere, beat Iowa, Ohio, and OSU in all like whole, first to 14 win type games. Iowa State's one of those teams that can do that, where they can do anything in September is believable for Iowa State. And then, they come out of nowhere and give Kansas, a fight for their life or something like that. And you look at it and go, okay, well, good to see they didn't quit. And that's something about Matt Campbell teams I'll always give him credit for. They do not quit at all, ever. Sometimes it's annoying. We've seen that a lot with Oklahoma and Iowa State watching some of those games where it's just, why will you not go away already? And Iowa State's very good about that. And that's something they deserve a lot of credit for. But, you can fight all you want, but when you can't get a first down, all that effort is for nothing.
Yeah.
And that moves us on to BYU. Tyler, last year we had the hot take machine about BYU.
Oh, now we get to my missteps here.
Listen, we'll get to mine when we talk about certain other teams that I had hot takes about that did not take. We'll talk about that a lot in the SEC one where I was completely wrong about a lot of things. That's okay because hopefully that'll clarify. But I'm going to give you BYU here, obviously. BYU last year, still 8-5, still a good team, but just not where we all thought they would be. And I mean, you weren't the only one that was hyping up BYU. We all thought they'd be better than 8-5, but now this year you're moving into the Big 12, kind of a rebuild year, not the best year to come in on if you're BYU, but we'll have to see what they do. BYU is another one of those teams that you've got Keaton Slovis as your quarterback now. This is the third school he's been at. He was at USC, then he was at Pitt, now he's here at BYU. You've got opportunities to do something. You have a new defensive coordinator. You have all the tools there to make something happen. It's just down to will they.
So as hyped as I was for BYU last year, I've laid it out the reasons. Jared Hall, sleeper Heisman contender, he just couldn't stay healthy. The dude couldn't stay healthy. They were plagued by injury. They had lost too much from the previous season with that really good year. As hyped as I was for them last year, I am very down on them this year. This is not going to be a pretty season for BYU. I don't think Keaton Slovis is the answer. There's a reason he's on his third team, and I just don't know if there's going to be nearly any sort of talent around him to make it work. Of all the new Big 12 teams, I'd say they're going to be right there at the bottom with Houston. I mean, it's a team that's got so many holes. That's the issue. Last year was really supposed to be that year where they established, the program's coming around again. We talk about trending up, right, going into new conferences. They really needed last year to be a 10, 11-win season and then really winning some of those big games. That just didn't happen. It just didn't happen. And I think that was a missed window, and I think, unfortunately, this year you're going to see a big rebuilding project going on there at BYU.
And you look at BYU's schedule, you start with Sam Houston and Southern Utah, so you get a little bit of that start to build up, and then you get Arkansas, just right out of the gate, your big non-con game. You go on the road to Fayetteville. You come back, you go to Kansas, you get your little bit of, okay, here we go. Not the worst draw you could get to start the Big 12, and then Cincinnati, okay, another new team. But then you get that bye week, and you just get everything thrown at you. At TCU, Texas Tech, at Texas, at West Virginia, then Iowa State, Oklahoma, and at Oklahoma State. It gets a little bit easier on the back end there, but still by that point, I mean, once you get that boom, boom, boom of TCU, Texas Tech, Texas, that is not the three teams in a row you want to draw there.
No, and again, you want to talk about, we talk about depth and things of that nature. That's what I think is going to hurt the most for this BYU team. I just don't know if they have any depth to really compete. I mean, there's going to be times where I guarantee you there's going to be that big injury come along, unfortunately, and they're just not going to have anybody ready, and it's not necessarily the fault of the coaching staff. You just caught yourself in a weird cycle, right, where everybody that you needed to come through didn't quite come through like they needed to last year, and you're just kind of left in a little bit of a disarray. Things just aren't solid enough underneath them, I think, is the issue. So I think there might be flashes to where they can show, hey, in the long term, this might work out for them. It's just this year I don't think it's going to be the year.
Yeah, I mean, you look at the schedule, at least for me, a 2-0 start seems inevitable, and then after that, if you can get to 4, 5, 6 wins, I think 6 is probably your ceiling if you're BYU.
I think if you get to 6 wins with this schedule, that is an absolute amazing sign for BYU. It's kind of like the Oklahoma State thing, right, where you lost so much. If you could turn it into a bowl season despite that, that's a huge win going forward in terms of, stabilizing yourself, so to speak, into the conference.
Yeah, I mean, I would think more likely 4 than 6, somewhere in that 4 to 5. I think that 6 is possible, but
I think 4 to 5 is fair.
Yeah, a rough start for BYU here, and looking at another newcomer to the Big 12, it's Houston. And Houston, you want to talk about a fun start? You get UTSA right out of the gate. Just here you go. Here's one of the best group of 5 teams. Have fun with it. You get the Road Runners. Then you get Rice. You get a rivalry game there. And then welcome to the Big 12. Here's TCU. I mean, just another brutal opening game there, and then Sam Houston at Texas Tech. So, fun fact, though, I mean, you look at the first 7 games that Houston doesn't leave the state. That's at least a positive.
Yeah, that's got to be nice, right? I mean, now that being said, it's Texas, so you still may have to drive quite a bit for some of those games. But, at Houston, I'm not as they're kind of the same path that BYU had, right? Where 2 years ago had a big season, you go 12-2. Last year was by what was expected a disappointment at 8-5. Now you're kind of in the same boat as BYU, where it's okay. Now we come into a new conference and we're trying to rebuild a little bit. That's where it's tough. So this year you're just trying to find the positives. You're trying to figure out, okay, who's legit enough to stick around to lead us into the next 2 to 3 years as far as contributors, who could set the tone for those next 2 to 3 years to say, okay, hey, now we're here in the Big 12 and we're starting to play like a Power 5 team. That's what it's going to be about, really. I wouldn't expect this team to be a bowl team. They've got some decent breaks in their schedule. You catch Cincinnati, OSU at home late in the season, so that's better than being on the road there. But, you got Texas, Kansas State, Baylor right there. That's a tough stretch. That game at the end of the season gets UCF on the road will be tough. And then that early season, as you mentioned, UTSA, TCU, Texas Tech, those are all really tough games out the gate. But I'd put them kind of the same bucket as BYU. Probably, most likely, 4 to 5 win team. If you get to a bowl game, that's a good sign.
And for one of the big games here, obviously, it's a big game to them, but you would never think about it nationally.
Sure.
Dana Holgorsen against his former team, West Virginia. Yeah. How about that for getting a little bit of a Thursday night schedule there? But I'm with you, Tyler. I think Houston is a 4 to 5 win team at best. If they get 6, they've done some miracle somewhere to get that 6th win and go to a bowl game. Only 2 more teams left to go, and the final newcomer here is Cincinnati. Now, Cincinnati kind of going a bit of a overhaul, so to speak. Enters Scott Satterfield. Luke Fickell has gone on to Wisconsin. A bit of shuffling going around, new transfer quarterback. It's Emory Jones. Now, Emory Jones, he's another one of those guys that he's been about everywhere. Was it Florida? Was it Arizona State? Now he's here at Cincy. This is a Cincinnati team that they're kind of just experimenting with everything, and that even comes down to TV, Tyler. Would you look at that? They play Pitt on the CW. How about that? I mean, it's one of those, since he's just kind of, they're everywhere. They've been expanding their brand. They're trying to say, hey, we exist as well. This is not just Ohio State and nobody else here. Cincy exists too. You made the playoffs. You've done just about everything you can. They're kind of like where UCF is, in my opinion. They're one of those on the rise, and they've gotten here at the perfect time.
So a CW tangent here, because this is I'm a big NASCAR fan, as you know.
Yeah.
The CW has picked up the full rights to the NASCAR Xfinity Series, which is not their top series. It's the next top series, so to speak, for starting next year, like where all the races and everything. The CW is quietly kind of, I dare say smartly saying, okay, we know ESPN, Fox, all those have limited pie to go around in terms of the money, right? TV is not what it once was with all the streaming and this and that. So what kind of little stuff can we pick up that as a platform where, again, in every household, they're one of those free, over-the-air type of deals where everybody can get them, right? They're like, how can we sell ourselves to some of these, whether it's a college football game or NASCAR or something like that, to where it's not quite something where ESPN or Fox is going to look at and, hey, this is a prime target thing. They've got bigger fish to fry. So CW Tangent is, I like what they're doing. They're kind of sneaking in and being quietly picking up some of the nice little stuff that I think fits them well. But back on the Cincinnati thing, I think long-term Cincinnati's got a good shot to emerge out of the 4 teams as maybe them and UCF, I think, are really going to be the 2 that kind of shine in the early stages of the new Big 12 of the teams that have been added, right? Because I think they position themselves brand-wise well. Obviously, UCF, we talked about that. They know how to do it. They can brand themselves pretty well. Cincinnati really took the momentum of making the playoffs and all that and used that to kind of launch themselves into a different space. Obviously, you lose Luke Fickell, but it's kind of one of those deals that was expected, right? He's been a big-time coach. You figured at some point he would jump back. But I think going forward, Cincinnati would be all right. This year, it's kind of one of those deals where, again, they have sold themselves on being good on defense in recent history. Offensively, they've had some guys. You think Desmond Ritter was, a big-time part of what they did in their run. Can they just find those pieces that in the next 2 to 3 years after this year can be huge contributors for potential strike at trying to be contenders? That's the goal, I think. Schedule-wise, it's kind of a mixed bag. You got some tough ones. You got some ones that obviously are going to be more winnable. Your non-con's a little wonky. I don't think Pitt's the easiest game on the road there. Miami of Ohio is projected to be one of the best MAC teams, but I don't know how much that means because that's a conference where the champion could be 8-5. So it's kind of a weird – they're the wild card in the bottom half, I guess is what I'm trying to say there, Cade. I'm not sure what to make of Cincinnati wholly this year.
Well, here's the thing with Cincinnati. I think this is going to be just a weird year for them in general because, not only are you bringing a new coach in, you're shifting everything around. You're having to switch identities a little bit. Cincinnati struggled to run the ball last year, Tyler.
Yeah, which is something that they do well when they're at their peak.
Cincinnati, we've known them for playing good defense and running the ball. And last year, they struggled at times to do a little bit of both, but overall, a 9-4 season. Still a great year for them. But you look at it, Eastern Kentucky right out the gate, that's a win. Pitt is one of those weird games that I could see it going either way just because of early in the season, you catch Pitt off a little bit. Miami of Ohio, that's a rivalry game. That's a big deal game there. Cincinnati's going to be focused for that, obviously. Then you get Oklahoma. Welcome to the Big 12 moment again.
Yep.
They're going to be – I'm excited to see Nippert for that game because keep in mind, Oklahoma, when they went to Cincinnati, they played at Paul Brown Stadium. They played at the Bengals Stadium. They have never been inside Cincy's actual arena. You'll have the Big 12 homecoming there. You'll have just an insane atmosphere, I'm sure. It'll be fun to see. And then Cincy from there on out, we talked about it, not really the worst schedule they could draw. They got a decent draw. Iowa State, Baylor, some wild card teams we talked about, Kansas as well, Houston, West Virginia, Oklahoma State kind of more on the downside of things. It would not shock me if everything goes well, Cincy could be a 6-7 win team. On the downside, though, if they're one of the more low end, they still struggle to run the ball a little bit. It wouldn't shock me if they are a 4 or 5 win team and you look at it going, okay, well, it's a rebuilding year. It's one of those, you take a wild card team, you throw a rebuilding year in, you throw a whole lot in as well, like a conference move or something like that. And Cincy's one of those weird wild card teams, Tyler.
Well, and I think for them on the upper end of success, obviously you mentioned the things with defense and the running game, but if Emory Jones finally kind of settles in to reach some of that potential he's expected to have been then that would be the biggest factor for them in terms of reaching the upper limit of what they could do this year. If he's kind of more what we saw at Arizona State and Florida, where he's an exciting player, but ultimately one that just makes maybe a little bit too many mistakes to get you over the top, then, they'll have kind of more of a so-so year, like you said, where it's just like, okay, they're rebuilding. We'll see where they're at in, a couple years.
And that brings us to our final team, Tyler. One conference almost down, and West Virginia, Neil Brown.
We got to talk about West Virginia. This is dumpster fire.
Okay, here's my very simple, for the notes here, not to give everything away, I give a weaknesses/concerns, and my weakness/concern, I just put Neil Brown.
Yeah.
That is just exactly what I put.
They should have fired him
West Virginia fans want this guy gone.
Yeah.
They have every right to want this guy gone. If this guy was anywhere near my program, I'd want him gone too at this point.
I would call police.
You just try to get a restraining order the second
find
you
some
could.
way to get him out of there.
And, you look at it for West Virginia, you start the year with Penn State, and, we'll see about Penn State. We'll talk about them.
Right.
Penn State's an exciting, intriguing team. They're one of those that really keep an eye on. West Virginia could make that a game for a while, but at the end of the day, that's a game you're going to lose. It's Happy Valley. It's not a place you want to be. Duquesne, if you lose to Duquesne, just fire fire
Bill Brown will get tarmacked at that point.
In Morgantown. They'll drive him to the airport just to tarmac.
Oh, absolutely.
But then you get Pitt, obviously, huge game there. You get Saturday Night Football, all eyes on you for that one. And then Texas Tech and TCU. there's a legitimate possibility that West Virginia is 1-4 going to their bye week.
I think that's very likely.
If that does happen, maybe 2-3 if they play up to Pitt or something like that. Because, I mean, that's the most likely I would think of those three there that they get a win. If you're not 3-2, fire Neil Brown. I know that's unrealistic for them to be 3-2, but I think everyone wants it to happen at this point anyways. I mean,
basically the long and short is if you're seeing more of the same of what you saw last year, yeah. I mean, the West Virginia Athletic Department is kind of in a bad spot right now. Obviously, it had the whole issue with Coach Huggins on the basketball side thing. That's a mess. And Neil Brown, has been proven. It has been put out there. It's been reported. He has rubbed guys the wrong way. Yeah. And he's driven them out. Good talent that they had gone, right? So I just, at this point, the goal, and I don't understand why universities do this in a spot, especially when you're in power conference of, hey, we got to win, right? Why hang on to a guy that you know is damaged at that point, has damaged your program, has taken in the opposite direction? To me, there's not much leeway, especially with what's been reported on this guy. He just does not seem like a culture fit. He seems kind of out of depth. I mean, I don't know how else to put it. You need to move on. Even if it leads to a couple more ugly years, in the long term, it's going to be better than hanging on to him.
And I do want to give some positives for West Virginia. I don't want this to be 100% West Virginia's the worst team ever, something like that. But, I mean, they do have some nice things. C.J. Donaldson, when he was healthy last year, he was fun to watch. Anytime you get someone with his frame able to barrel over people, he was averaging, over 100 yards a game. Sure. He's a good player. Garrett Green, I'm intrigued to see how he works because we didn't see him a whole lot last year, which I think is another reason you could fire Neil Brown. You see J.T. Daniels, who's a statue. Yeah. You see Garrett Green, who has any ability to run around in the pocket at all and make some plays happen. We saw it happen a lot in that second half of the season. They finally let him go. He's more than likely going to be the starter this year, I would think. He can make some plays. Now, the problem is, where are your wide receivers? Where's anything else? Defense, maybe it happens, maybe it doesn't. You've lost some of your good playmakers there on the defensive side of the ball. West Virginia can be, maybe a 4 or 5 win team like last year, 5-7 last year. Maybe you can get back to that if you get a lot to go your way. But it would not surprise me, Tyler, if this was like a 3-win team. Yeah. And that's sad for West Virginia. They're one of the best, they were one of the best mid-major programs for a long time, group of 5, whatever you want to call it, kind of mixed basketball and football terms here. But they're one of the programs that you kind of thought of as, okay, hey, if they can just get a little bit more to go their right way, something can happen. It's sad to see them in this state.
Yeah, and it's, again, I go back to the Bob Huggins thing. It's kind of not just the football side. It is a clear something's wrong in the athletic department, as a whole, maybe even in the school. It's just one of those deals where almost like they kind of gave up, a little bit of caring a bit. I don't know what that is. And football team-wise, their issue is I just didn't really see any coherent unity last year. There weren't really guys kind of playing for each other. It was kind of a, all right, we'll come play if we want to type things. And the other times they just disappeared, as a unit. Not necessarily certain players, but just as a unit. So, if I'm West Virginia, I would have fired Neil Brown yesterday. But if you see more of the same this year that we saw last year, you better make it quick. Because if not, it's just going to drag on, man. It's going to be a long season.
And that's one of the trends we've kind of started to see in college football too, Tyler, is just the fire someone earlier on in the season that gives you more time to use the season to go find your coach, and then you can just start getting right into the portal and recruiting in December.
Well,
and not having to wait until all the way then and then fire someone.
It allows you to see who maybe on the staff or player-wise is a positive difference maker. Who's handling that type of change well and who's emerging as a difference maker in a positive fashion. Because clearly at that point, the culture's not there. So you need guys, whether that's on the coaching staff or on the field as players, to start establishing, okay, clean slate, let's start pushing in the right direction.
And that will do it. Keep in mind, this is only our first conference preview, folks. As always, thank you for tuning in. And right as I said that, our camera finally decided to freeze. So
we made all the way through.
That is probably a sign that we need to wrap this one up at the very least. But, folks, I know it's a long video. If you made it all the way to the end, once again, thank you for sticking through it, listening to us go through all 14 teams here. Feel free once again to like the video, subscribe, leave a comment down below. Let us know if you made it through the whole video. If you did, you're a trooper. I salute you. Have a great one, everybody. It's just great to be back. Folks, it's almost August. It's just such a fun time of the year. You're not going to say anything on that one, Tyler? We're just going to end it on dead silence.
Sorry. No.
I was trying to set you up, but
no,
we're keeping this in.
It's going to be a great time. I'm excited. I think there's going to be a lot of intrigue in this college football season. I wouldn't be shocked if we see a couple teams rise up that, they just weren't totally expecting. I think with the transfer portal, NIL, there's going to be more parity, I guess, what I'm trying to say, in college football overall. Maybe not of who wins. I think, as we saw last year, you can have parity and still very much have a clear team that's above the rest, but should make for a fun season.
Alrighty, with that being said now, have a good one, everybody.